Shy teacher greeted the little girl with sign language, unaware her rich father rancher was falling for her. Cedar Creek, Wyoming, autumn, 1881. The wind rolled off the prairie in long, sighing gusts, lifting dust from the narrow road that led to the single-room schoolhouse on the edge of town. The building stood weathered but proud, fresh whitewash over old timber, the bell overhead silent but expectant. Inside, desks waited, neatly aligned, chalk laid out, and a bouquet of dried daisies placed gently on the teacher's table. Maggie Doyle stood in the doorway, clutching a slim slate board to her chest. She was small, almost fragile, with auburn hair braided tight and tucked beneath a modest bonnet. Her dress, plain brown wool, tugged slightly in the breeze. Her eyes were warm, but her mouth rarely opened. When it did, her voice came low, airy, almost a whisper, as though every word cost her breath. It had been that way since the accident, years ago, when a fall from the orphanage rafters left her lungs never quite the same. She had grown up in silence, not because she chose it, but because the world had taught her that her voice, when it did break through, was a thing to mock. So she learned to listen more, write better, and when words failed, her hands spoke. The children began to trickle in. Laughter, boots stomping, the creak of satchels and chairs. Maggie nodded at each one, scribbling her name on the board. Miss Doyle. Some stared at her a little too long, at her quiet, her stillness, but she smiled gently and gestured them in. Then the door opened again. A tall man stood silhouetted in the frame, broad-shouldered, hat in hand, a girl at his side. His face was carved from stone, weather-beaten, shadowed beneath a brim. But the girl was the opposite, petite, wide-eyed, her blonde curls pinned in soft loops. She gripped his hand like it was the only thing anchoring her to the earth. Emily Hayes. Maggie had been told about her. 4 years old. Lost her hearing during a fever the winter before. Since then, she'd become a whisper in her own home, still there, still loved, but unreachable. Her father, Samuel Hayes, had built his wealth on cattle and grit, but no coin had bought back his daughter's laughter. Maggie knelt down. She didn't speak. She didn't try to coax the girl with sweet nonsense like others had. Instead, slowly, she raised both hands and signed. Hello. I'm happy to meet you. Emily's eyes widened, her mouth opened, then closed again. She stepped back, startled. Then something flickered, a light, a tremble. Her tiny hands moved clumsily but surely. You talk with hands? Maggie smiled. Yes, always. Would you like to learn with me? Emily didn't answer. She just ran forward and hugged her. Behind them, Samuel stood frozen on the threshold. He had not spoken a word since entering. Now he watched, his chest heavy, throat tight. His daughter, who hadn't smiled in 7 months, was clinging to a stranger like she had found home. He turned away before Maggie could rise and meet his eyes. Outside, he let the door close softly behind him. The wind was still blowing, but he hardly felt it. The richest man in town had never known helplessness, until he saw a shy teacher return the world to his daughter, one quiet hand at a time. The days that followed were quiet, but different. Each morning, Emily Hayes arrived with her small boots scuffing against the floorboards, her lunch pail swinging in rhythm. She no longer clung to her father's coat or hesitated at the door. She walked in on her own now, head high, eyes bright, scanning the room for one person. Maggie. The young teacher always greeted her the same way, with open palms, a warm smile, and slow, clear signs. Good morning, Emily. I missed you. And every time, Emily lit up. Her hands fluttered back in clumsy excitement, her fingers not quite steady but eager. I missed you too. It was a silent conversation, but to Emily, it roared like music. At first, the other children watched from a distance. They whispered behind their hands, curious and unsure. Some had never seen a person use their hands to talk. But Maggie never pushed. She simply taught. She wrote each lesson on the board with graceful loops of chalk. Tree, river, friend. Then, facing the class, she signed each word with deliberate care. She moved slowly, repeating the motions, letting her hands glide like a river flowing from thought to thought. When Emily mimicked the gestures, Maggie smiled and nodded. When she stumbled, Maggie corrected her gently, guiding her small hands with patience. Then, without pressure, she opened the moment to the rest of the class. "Would anyone else like to try?" she asked in her soft rasp of a voice, barely audible, but somehow still heard. At first, the room remained quiet. Some children shrugged, others giggled. But one morning, Maggie stepped inside to find Caleb, one of the older boys, usually first to tease, already standing at his desk. His fingers moved slowly, stiffly. "Hello, Miss Doyle." The class erupted in laughter. Maggie didn't scold. She smiled. "Perfect," she whispered. Sarah signed next, then Lily, then Tom. By the end of the week, nearly every child had learned how to say, "Good morning, Emily," without making a sound. Emily's face glowed. Every morning became a chorus of quiet gestures and shared understanding. Outside, just beyond the schoolhouse window, Samuel Hayes lingered. He would sit tall in his saddle, reins loose in his fingers, hat low over his brow. He told himself he was simply checking on Emily's routine, but each day he stayed longer. He saw the way Maggie bent low beside his daughter, fingers moving in tandem. He saw the gentle way she encouraged, corrected, waited, and more than that, he saw something stirring in his child, confidence, joy, the first signs of healing. And he noticed something else. Maggie Doyle never raised her voice. Not once. Her words, when they came, were soft, gravelly, broken. Most times, she said nothing at all. Her hands spoke louder than any voice could. One quiet afternoon, after the children had gone and dusk draped the prairie in gold, Samuel returned. He had a small package tucked under one arm, paper, pencils, new slates. He meant to leave it by the door, but as he neared the window, he froze. Inside, the classroom was nearly dark, save for the flickering oil lamp on the desk. Beneath it, Maggie sat alone. Her sleeves were pushed to her elbows. Her hands moved slowly through the air, curling, shaping, repeating. Her lips moved silently, echoing the signs. Her fingers trembled from exhaustion, but she didn't stop. Hope, family, listen, safe. She signed the words over and over, as if building a new language from the ashes of silence. Samuel stood still, watching. He didn't speak. He didn't step inside. He turned instead, walking back toward his horse with slow, deliberate steps. He stopped beside it, eyes fixed on the golden light glowing in the window behind him. His hands curled at his sides. She was doing all of this for his daughter. And in the hush of an empty classroom, a hardened rancher realized something he hadn't known before. There was more power in this woman's quiet hands than in a dozen men shouting to be heard. It began with whispers, soft, sharp-edged things that slithered through church pews and market stalls like cold wind under doors. "They say Samuel Hayes paid her. A teacher who signs. It's not normal. She just wants his favor. Must be nice. Catering to the richest man's daughter." Maggie heard it first from a shopkeeper, said with a forced smile. Then again, from a group of mothers outside the bakery, their laughter too brittle. By the time it reached her from the blacksmith's wife, it no longer sounded like gossip. It sounded like truth. That night, she sat in her small room, hands still, lips pressed tight. The words echoed louder than any classroom noise. "She only came to please the rich. She isn't here for the children." She folded the lesson plans she'd written so carefully. Her notebook, filled with signs and sketches for the class, felt suddenly childish. She remembered how the sisters at the convent used to look at her. Poor thing, with that broken little voice. What good will she be? She thought she'd outrun that voice, but maybe they were right. Maybe she didn't belong anywhere. Samuel heard the rumors 2 days later while walking through the market. A man he'd known for years said it bluntly. "So, Hayes, bought yourself a teacher, did you?" He stopped cold. The man laughed, trying to soften the blow. No shame in it. Folks do what they must for their kids. But the others are talking. Samuel's jaw tightened. He didn't respond. He just turned, paid for his salt, and rode home. His silence harder than any retort. That evening, Emily seemed quieter than usual. She sat at her little desk, drawing Maggie and herself holding hands under a sundae. When Maggie passed by, Emily tugged her sleeve, then slowly signed, "Don't go." Maggie froze. Her throat burned. She knelt beside the girl, her hands hovering mid-air, then gently brushed a curl from Emily's forehead. She smiled, but her eyes shimmered. That night, under a cold, bright moon, she sat on the porch steps, a sealed envelope in her lap, her letter of resignation. She didn't cry. She just stared at the stars, wondering how many times she'd have to start over before she stopped hoping it might last. Samuel arrived late. He hadn't planned to, but his hands had wandered, almost on their own, toward the reins, toward the schoolhouse. The building was dark, but he spotted a shape on the porch, small, still. As he neared, he saw it was her. He paused in the shadows. Maggie was unaware of him. She sat curled forward, arms wrapped around herself. Beside her, Emily leaned gently into her side, a blanket around her shoulders. Then Maggie began to sign. "You are brave. You are bright. You made me smile again." Emily replied, slowly, her signs shaky but clear. "You made me feel safe. Please don't go." Maggie looked down, struggling to breathe. "I'll miss you," she signed. And Emily, lips trembling, reached out and wrapped her arms around her. Samuel stepped forward then, gravel crunched under his boots. Both heads turned. He stood in the moonlight, hat in hand. His voice, when it came, was low, rough, with held-back emotion. "You gave her a world I couldn't buy." Maggie stared at him, startled. "I've tried everything, Miss Doyle. Doctors, tutors. Nothing reached her. Nothing made her light up." He looked at his daughter, now clutching Maggie's arm. "You did that. With your hands. With your silence." Maggie opened her mouth, but the words caught. So she signed, slowly, "They don't believe in me." Samuel knelt, not caring for dust or pride. "I do." He didn't ask her to stay. Not yet. He just looked at her, truly looked, and said the only truth he knew. "My daughter needs you, not because you're kind or clever, but because, when she looks at you, she sees someone who listens." The envelope lay forgotten on the step between them. And for the first time in days, Maggie let herself believe she might stay. The wind had shifted that evening, dry and restless, stirring through the brittle grass around Cedar Creek. Inside the small schoolhouse, the stove crackled louder than usual, its cast-iron belly radiating heat into the room long after sunset. Maggie stayed late, as she often did, straightening chairs and wiping slates. Emily and two other children, Sarah and Thomas, had stayed behind, waiting for their fathers to pick them up after helping close the cattle gate nearby. Then came the first pop, a sharp, metallic sound. Maggie looked up. The stove was rattling. A thin stream of black smoke curled from the base. She moved quickly, grabbing the fire poker, but too late. A loud crack split the air as the stovepipe jolted loose. Embers scattered across the wooden floor. Flames caught on a loose stack of papers, then raced across the kindling dry floorboards. Sarah screamed. Thomas froze. Emily's wide eyes locked on the spreading fire, unable to hear the crackle but feeling its growing heat. "Outside," Maggie rasped, her voice barely above a whisper. Smoke thickened fast. Maggie dropped to her knees and signed, "Run, firm, clear," over and over, waving the children toward the door. Sarah and Thomas bolted, coughing, but Emily hesitated, rooted in place. Flames surged near the doorway. Maggie lunged. She wrapped her arms around Emily, shielding the child with her own body. Sparks hissed as they landed on her shawl. A beam collapsed behind them. Maggie flinched, feeling heat tear through the skin of her left arm. Still, with her free hand, she signed one last word into Emily's trembling hands. "Go." Emily bolted through the smoke, feet pounding the boards. Outside, townsfolk had begun to gather, shouts rising as flames lit up the windows. Samuel arrived on horseback, eyes widening at the sight. He leapt off, yelling, "Where is she? Where's Emily?" She ran out. "Maggie's still inside," someone called. Without pause, Samuel shoved through the gathering crowd and into the inferno. Inside, smoke clawed down his throat. Flames snarled around desks and beams. He found Maggie near the back, slumped against the blackboard, her face pale, arm blistered red. "God, Maggie!" he gasped, stumbling forward. She didn't stir. Samuel gathered her up, shielding her burned arm, coughing as the smoke tore into his lungs. He staggered through the collapsing entryway, just as the back half of the roof groaned and caved. Outside, gasps rang out as he emerged. Emily rushed forward but was held back by a neighbor. She watched, wide-eyed, as Samuel dropped to his knees in the dirt, cradling Maggie like glass. "Maggie," he whispered, his voice cracked with panic. He pressed a shaking hand to her cheek. "Please, don't leave." She didn't move. He leaned in, his brow against hers, voice breaking. "Don't go. Don't leave me. Don't leave the girl." The fire behind him roared into the sky, but he only saw her face, soot-streaked, soft, still. "Please," he whispered again. "We need you. I need you." Then, a twitch. Her fingers curled weakly. Her lashes fluttered open. She groaned, barely audible. He laughed, choked, broken, but full of relief. "You're here. Thank God, you're here." Emily, still held back, reached forward with small fingers, signing one word into the air over and over, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Safe, safe, safe." Maggie blinked up at Samuel. Her lips moved, no sound came, but she signed one word back. "Promise?" He nodded, voice raw. "Yes, I promise." And there, on the scorched earth before the town, with firelight behind them and the child watching, something unspoken but true passed between their hearts. Not yet love, but the first spark of something even stronger. A vow. The bandages wrapped Maggie's hands like prison walls. Each morning, she sat propped against pillows in the spare room of the town's infirmary, sunlight filtering through the lace curtains. But she couldn't feel the warmth. Her hands, once so gentle, so fluent, were stiff, blistered, wrapped in white gauze from fingertip to elbow. Dr. Myers had said the burns would heal but slowly, and the nerves in her fingers, they might never return to full grace. "You'll live," he'd said, "but the hands may never be quite the same." She had nodded, not because she accepted it, but because there was nothing left to say. Across the room, Emily sat quietly on a stool, her small legs swinging, her doll forgotten in her lap. Her eyes were red from crying. She kept glancing at Maggie's bandaged hands, then back to Maggie's face, then back again. Her fingers twitched. She signed a word, then another. But Maggie didn't respond. She couldn't. Tears welled in Emily's eyes. She crawled onto the bed and pressed her tiny hands to Maggie's, desperately searching for response. Maggie turned away, face crumpling. Emily began to cry. "Shh," Maggie whispered, the word hoarse, nearly silent. I'm still here." But Emily couldn't hear her. She only saw the silence, the missing hands, the world without signs. Later that evening, Maggie stared at the ceiling while twilight crept across the room. A knock came at the door. Samuel stepped inside. He didn't speak at first, just closed the door behind him and removed his hat. He looked tired. Dust still clung to his coat. His shoulders hunched forward, hands clenched. He stepped to the foot of her bed and stood awkwardly. Then he said, "Emily hasn't spoken all day, not even with her hands." Maggie turned away. "She doesn't understand why I'm broken." Samuel walked to her side. He knelt, slowly, and looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "No," he said, "she understands too well. She just doesn't know how to fix it." He reached into his coat pocket and drew out a small, folded note. On it, scrawled in careful letters, were 4 hand signs. Below them, a shaky translation. "Don't give up." "She taught me," Samuel said, "this morning." Maggie blinked. He took a breath. "I didn't. I never tried to learn before. I thought if I gave her a tutor, hired the right people, it would be enough. But I watched her try to speak with you. And I saw what it meant." He reached for her hand, gently taking the bandaged fingers into his larger ones. "So I asked her. I said, 'Teach me what she needs to hear.' And this is what she gave me." He fumbled, then raised his hands. His fingers moved awkwardly. The motions were stiff, out of rhythm. He looked like a man trying to dance with boots too heavy, but his eyes never left hers. He signed again, slower this time. "Don't give up." Maggie's lips trembled. Samuel's voice lowered. "I know I don't belong in your world. But I'll learn it. I'll learn every word if I have to. I'll be your hands until yours heal. Just don't go. Don't fade." Silence wrapped the room. Then Maggie broke. Tears slid down her cheeks, and her breath hitched with the weight of unspoken pain. She reached with her good hand and touched his sleeve. "You're not just learning signs," she whispered, voice raspy. "You're saving my language." Samuel looked down, his jaw clenched, emotions raw and unmasked. "I don't care if the whole town watches," he said. "Let them talk, let them judge. You gave my daughter back her voice. Now let me give you back yours." In that moment, with gauze-bound hands and broken strength, Maggie felt more seen than ever before. And outside the window, the wind whispered through the prairie grass, gentle now, as if the earth itself was holding its breath for a healing yet to come. The market square of Cedar Creek bustled beneath the late autumn Sunday. Wagons creaked, children darted between stalls, and townsfolk called out greetings over barrels of apples and sacks of flour. But underneath the chatter, something else brewed, quieter, sharper. "Have you heard?" whispered Mrs. Elkins to the baker's wife. "That rancher, Samuel Hayes, word is he's marrying the schoolteacher." "The one who can't talk, right?" the woman replied, voice low and skeptical. Poor man, must be lonely. She's not even from here." "Or maybe she just knows how to play the part. A rich widower? Easy mark." Their laughter, muffled and cruel, reached Maggie Doyle as she passed, basket in hand. She didn't stop, didn't turn, but her fingers clenched tighter around the wicker handle. She kept walking, heart thudding like hooves on hard soil. At the far stall, Emily tugged at Maggie's skirt and signed eagerly about the colors of the pumpkins. Maggie forced a smile and responded in kind, her fingers more hesitant than usual. She felt the eyes on her, the weight of stares and snickers curling like smoke behind her. Samuel stood at the edge of the square, speaking with a supplier. He saw her before she saw him. His eyes narrowed as he caught the tilt of her shoulders, the stiffness of her movements. And then he heard it. "You know what I think?" someone muttered nearby. "He's lost his mind, giving his name to a girl like that. She can't even hold a conversation." Samuel turned. "She's sweet, sure," another voice added. "But sweet, don't raise cattle or cook supper. Bet she's after the land. A cripple like that. What else she got?" The words didn't hit him like bullets. They hit like knives, deep, slow, meant to bleed. He stepped forward. The crowd barely noticed at first. Then someone pointed. Then silence spread like frost across a field. Samuel Hayes, the richest man in 3 counties, was walking toward Maggie Doyle, face carved in stone. Maggie noticed too late. She turned, startled, her basket trembling in her hands. Samuel reached her side and didn't stop. He took her hand, gently, firmly, and turned to face the crowd. "She doesn't need me to speak for her," he began, voice calm but loud enough for all to hear. "But I will." A murmur rippled through the market. Even the children stilled. "I've heard what you say," he continued. "All of it. And I'll tell you this, she isn't here for land or for money. She's here because she gave my daughter a world I couldn't buy. She gave her back light and sound and laughter." He turned slightly, looking down at Maggie. "She's not weak. She's stronger than anyone I've known. And she's not a burden. She's the one person this town should be proud to stand beside. Then he looked back at the crowd, his voice hardening. I don't need to protect her. I need her, and my daughter needs her more than any of you can understand. Silence. Utter, stunned silence. Even Mrs. Elkins lowered her eyes. Maggie stood frozen, her breath caught in her throat. Her cheeks were burning, her hands damp. She had never been defended in public before. Never seen a man stand tall beside her, not for pity, but for truth. Samuel turned to her again, quieter now. Let them say what they want, he murmured. I'll say this louder. Then, with all eyes watching, he lifted her hand to his chest, pressing it gently there. Maggie looked up at him, her eyes wide and shimmering. Somewhere in the crowd, a small pair of hands clapped together, Emily smiling bright. And the town of Cedar Creek said nothing more. The days turned crisp, leaves rustling gold and amber across the dry paths of Cedar Creek. The scent of pine and chimney smoke lingered in the air, and though the nights chilled early, inside the schoolhouse, warmth had begun to grow. Maggie sat behind her desk, a wool shawl draped over her shoulders, her hands still bandaged but healing. The pain was dull now, a constant throb that reminded her what she had risked and what she had saved. Each morning, Emily greeted her with a bright smile and signed, "Good morning, Miss Maggie," with careful fingers. The other children followed, some awkwardly, some fluently. Maggie's heart swelled a little more each time. Samuel came often now. Sometimes under the pretense of helping Emily with her studies. Other times, simply to sit at the back of the room while the lesson unfolded. He never interrupted. He would watch Emily's eager hands, Maggie's calm patience, and the way the two of them seemed to move in perfect silent rhythm. He stayed long after the other parents had gone. And when he did leave, he always left something behind. One morning, Maggie found a small jar on her desk. Inside, a thick balm, its scent familiar, lavender, sage, comfrey. She touched the lid, then looked toward the back of the room, where Samuel stood with arms crossed, pretending not to watch. She signed, a simple motion of thanks. He nodded, once. Another afternoon, Emily handed Maggie a folded piece of parchment. When she opened it, her breath caught. A crayon drawing, 3 figures, a tall man, a woman with a long braid, and a little girl in between. They held hands beneath a crooked sundae. Above them, Emily had written in large, careful letters, "Family." Maggie pressed the paper to her chest, her throat tightened. That night, she sat at the small table in her rented room, candle flickering low, her diary open before her. Her hand trembled as she wrote. Today, Emily called me her family. I wanted to weep, not from pain, but from a joy I am afraid to touch. And Samuel, he looks at me as if I matter. I do not know what to do with that. The ink blurred slightly. Maggie blinked, lifted her head and started when she saw him. Samuel stood in the open doorway, one hand still on the frame, his coat dusted with frost. He had knocked, she realized. She simply hadn't heard. He didn't speak. She gestured him in, cheeks flushed. He stepped forward, eyes falling to the diary page. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I didn't mean to intrude." She shook her head and reached for the book, but he placed a hand gently over the page, halting her. Then, slowly, with hands that had held reins and fences and rifle stocks but never felt more unsure, he began to sign. His movements were clumsy, stiff. But she understood. 1. I love you. The world stilled. Maggie stared at him, eyes wide, her breath frozen in her throat. He signed again, slower this time, more sure. I love you. Her hands fluttered, uncertain. Then she reached up, touched his cheek, soft as wind. And with trembling fingers, she signed back. I love you too. He exhaled as though he'd been holding his breath for months. Then, in the silence, he did not speak. He only reached down, took her hand, still scarred, still wrapped, and kissed each finger, reverent. No promises. No grand declarations. Just touch, just light, Just two people, broken in their own ways, choosing to be whole together. Outside, the frost deepened. But inside that small room in Cedar Creek, warmth bloomed quietly, like spring daring to return. The spring air in Cedar Creek carried promise. Banners of ribbon and wildflowers swayed above Main Street. Stalls brimmed with fresh produce, pies, ribboned horses. Laughter and music drifted through the town square. The spring festival had gathered everyone, from the blacksmith to the schoolchildren, from wrinkled grandmothers to dusty ranch hands. The sun had dipped low, casting long golden shadows over the sea of faces, all waiting for the evening's finale. Samuel Hayes stood at the foot of the raised wooden stage, flanked by Emily on his left and Maggie on his right. He wore his best coat, black wool, pressed, and his hat rested in his free hand. The stage was crowned with garlands of blossoms. Petals drifted in the breeze like confetti. Maggie's heart pounded fiercely, her fingers pressed together, her lips parting as though she might speak, but she did not. Emily, clutching the daisies she'd picked that morning, bounced slightly on her toes. Her eyes shone when they met Maggie's. She smiled, though her lips did not move. She extended a small hand and signed, "Stay with me." Samuel looked at Maggie, then to Emily, then back to Maggie again. Silence held the crowd's breath. Even the fiddler ceased his tune. A hush fell over Cedar Creek. Then Samuel lifted both his hands. He began to sign, slowly, deliberately. His fingers were not graceful. Some movements were awkward, some reversed, but the meaning was unmistakable. M-A-R-Y-M-E. His hands trembled on the final sign. Maggie's breath caught. The audience held its collective heart in suspense. Emily's small hands fluttered, signing back with excitement. S-A-Y-Y-E-S. Her fingers carved the letters in the air, eyes wide, cheeks flushed. Maggie's tears came unbidden. She raised her hands to her throat, then to her chest. Time seemed to slow. She looked at Samuel's earnest face, the sun catching the edges of his coat, dust still clinging to his boots. She saw his vulnerability, his resolve, his heart laid bare. She nodded. Her lips trembled, but no sound escaped. With trembling fingers, she signed back. E.S. E.S. A cheer erupted from the crowd, but Maggie and Samuel heard none of it. The world narrowed to that moment, their hands, their hearts, their silent vow. Samuel stepped forward, arms open. He leaned in and gathered Maggie against him, fingers pressing gently into her shawl. She melted into his embrace, her tears wet on his coat, her bandaged hands trembling upon his chest. Behind them, Emily ran up and hopped into Samuel's arms, wrapping her arms around both parents. They stood there, under the petals drifting down like gentle snowfall. A small family formed at last. The festival music resumed softly. Children clapped, neighbors cheered, lanterns flickered. Maggie's breath came in ragged sighs. She lifted her head just enough to see the faces, smiling, approving. Some wiped tears. The town had witnessed her most vulnerable moment and accepted it. Samuel dipped his head and placed a light kiss on Maggie's forehead. She couldn't speak, but she signed again, "Thank you." He brushed her hair softly and replied with a gentle squeeze of her shoulder. They stepped down from the stage, arms entwined. Emily skipped between them, holding both their hands. Petals blew around them, pink, white, yellow, like blessings caught in wind. Under the old cottonwood in front of the schoolhouse, they paused. Samuel turned to the crowd, raised his free hand, and signed in the clear evening light. "This is my promise. In every quiet moment, in every silent day, I choose her, and I choose us." Maggie's eyes filled, lips quivering in gratitude. She signed in reply, "And I choose you, and us." The crowd broke into applause, cheers and whistles mingling. Flames of lanterns glowed around them. The spring night seemed to lean close. And beneath drifting blossoms, in the hush between heartbeats, 3 hands remained clasped, small and large, gentle and strong. It was not spoken voices that united them, but hands that carried hope, Not wealth that bound them, but hearts that chose each other in silence. Not speech that bound them, but the hands. Not riches, but a heart that found a family in stillness. If the love story of Maggie, Samuel, and little Emily touched your heart, with hands that spoke louder than words, quiet acts of sacrifice, and healing found in the silence, don't forget to hit that hype button to let us know you're here. And if you want more deeply emotional, authentic, and soul-stirring tales from the old American West, subscribe to the Wild West Love Stories channel today. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next story.